Political reformers. Robert Lafayette and the Wisconsin Experiment. As governor of Wisconsin in 1901, Lafayette helped destroy the political machine, wrestle control away from lumber and railroad trusts, and establish a progressive government. He was the first of Republican insurgents to reach the Senate. He perfected a scheme for regulating public utilities by instituting public utilities commissions that created legislation for workers' safety, railroads, and regulation of public utilities, and replaced the existing spoil system with state civil service. The direct primary. In 1903, Lafayette pressured the legislature to institute an election open to all voters within the party, so that political candidates would be chosen by the people and not by party members. He also introduced the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. The initiative allowed citizens to introduce a bill. The referendum was a procedure where voters could cast ballots for or against proposed laws, and the recall gave citizens the right to remove elected officials from office. The initiative, referendum, and recall all worked to give citizens the power of legislation. The direct election of senators was enacted to counter the Senate corruption and control trusts. In 1913, it was approved as the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. No longer were senators chosen by state legislatures, instead they were directly elected by the people. They also adopted a state income tax, being the first state to do so. The Australian ballot, or the secret ballot, became introduced more widely in states to counteract political boss rule. It reduced bribery voting, since voting was now done secretly and bribers were unable to monitor voters. Unfortunately, the ballot also eliminated illiterate voters, as party workers could not help voters mark their ballots. In Galveston, Texas, a commission system was set up. In September of 1900, a tidal wave had devastated the city. So the city placed power into the hands of 5 commissioners, 2 elected and 3 appointed. A full-time city manager was hired. The commission system peaked in 1915 and was later replaced by the city manager system. Within 20 years, 400 cities had adopted a commission system, which reduced the power of the machine politics. President Teddy Roosevelt, the first modern president. Roosevelt was the first president in U.S. history to use the government as a vehicle to directly help public interest. He saw the presidency as what he called the bully pulpit, to preach his ideas. He supported progressive reform with strong rhetoric, but in reality he was more moderate. He often bypassed congressional opposition. He was enormously popular among a large percentage of Americans. He was the first president to play a significant role in world affairs, with his motto of "Speak softly, but carry a big stick, and you will go far." He was a major proponent of the military and naval preparedness. The Square Deal, in 1906 campaign slogan. Teddy Roosevelt's program embraced 3 C's: control of corporations, consumer protection, and conservation of natural resources. All progressive ideas. Control of corporations. The anthracite coal strike in 1902, which was a hard coal used for heating homes, 140,000 workers of the United Mine Workers Union in coal mines of Pennsylvania went on strike, demanding a 20% increase in pay and a reduction of the workday from 10 to 9 hours. They also wanted a fair weighing of coal and better safety conditions. George F. Baer, president of the company, assumed that the public would react against the miners and thus refused to arbitrate or negotiate. So, Teddy Roosevelt threatened to seize the mines and operate them with federal troops if the owners refused to compromise. This was unprecedented in U.S. history. The owners finally consented to arbitration. The miners received their 10% pay boost and a 9-hour workday, and owners got assurances that the union would not be officially recognized. The Department of Commerce and Labor was created to settle disputes between capital and labor in 1903. In 1902, Roosevelt attacked the Northern Securities Company, a holding company organized by J.P. Morgan and James G. Hill, due to its monopoly of railroads in the Northwest. The Supreme Court upheld Roosevelt's antitrust suit to dissolve it in 1904. Roosevelt was now seen as a trust buster, something that is a bit of an overstatement, as the man that would follow him, Taft, would break far more trust than Roosevelt did. The Elkins Act of 1903 aimed primarily at reducing abuse of rebates used by railroads. Heavy fines could now be imposed on both railroads and shippers for abusing rebates. The Hepburn Act, 1906, expanded the power of the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was created in 1887. It concluded that there were good trusts and bad trusts, which were greedy. Bad trusts should be dealt with, but good trusts were healthy. Roosevelt as a trust buster, his reputation's inflated, as Teddy Roosevelt exaggerated his antitrust activities to gain political popularity. Roosevelt did not consider wholesale trust busting economically a sound policy. He believed in regulating, not fragmenting trusts. In reality, trusts were healthier at the end of Teddy Roosevelt's reign than at any time before. President Taft would bust far more trust than Roosevelt. Consumer protection. Impulse for meat protection. European markets threatened to ban American meat since some meat from small packing houses was found to be tainted. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle would inspire the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. It was introduced by Teddy Roosevelt, and Congress passed the bill. Preparation of meat shipped over state lines would be subject to federal inspection through the meat-making process. Though the largest packers resisted certain features of the act, they accepted it as a means to drive out smaller businesses. The Pure Food and Drug Act, which is also inspired by Upton Sinclair's book, prevented the adulteration and mislabeling of foods and drugs. Hitherto, many patent medicines laced with alcohol, while labels misrepresented the contents of their containers, were brought to an end. Conservation. Roosevelt and conservation. Teddy Roosevelt was an outdoorsman. He was appalled at the destruction of timber and mineral resources. Gifford Pinchot was the head of the Federal Division of Forestry and had made significant contributions before Teddy Roosevelt. Conservation is Roosevelt's most tangible and enduring achievement. The Newlands Reclamation Act of 1902, the government authorized to collect money from the sale of public lands in western states and use the funds for the development of irrigation projects. Settlers repaid the cost of reclamation by building successful farms. The money was put into a revolving account to finance more such projects. Dozens of dams were constructed on virtually every major western river in subsequent decades. Saving the forests. Teddy Roosevelt set aside 125 million acres of forest in federal reserves. Also, he earmarked millions of acres of coal deposits as well as water resources useful for irrigation and power. Roosevelt would win re-election in 1904. He was elected in his own right by a large electoral margin over the Democrats. Eugene Debs ran on a socialist ticket, and the Prohibition Party was also on the ballot.